Now, when the first consumer drones appeared on the market, the public and indeed the authorities were largely oblivious to them. In those early days, they were mainly flown by hobbyists who had an interest in radio-controlled aircraft, but later on, as the cameras got better, as the safety systems improved, and as the control systems simplified such that pretty much anyone could fly one, they really, if you'll excuse the pun, took off. Fast forward a decade and drones have become mass market consumer items available for purchase in every high street electrical store in the world. The quality of drones has improved in inverse proportion to their price, and it's now possible to buy a 4K drone with cutting edge safety features and a 10-kilometer transmission range for $750. Something else has changed too. Consumer drones have managed to acquire a crappy reputation as intrusive, wildlife upsetting banshees used almost entirely, if you believe everything you read in community Facebook groups, for perving on middle-aged women while they're on the upstairs shitter. Now in 2021, the authorities are fully invested in the world of drones, starting with some high-profile prosecutions for crimes such as the infamous Bunnings snag stunt. They have slowly but surely brought the same level of interference, oversight, regulation, bureaucracy and taxation to the scene as every other facet of life in 21st century Australia. The clampdown is now nearly complete. The drone makers complicit in the authorities' control methods, and flying a drone in 2021 is a very different experience from back in the day. So here then is my guide to buying and using a drone legally in Australia in 2021 in 3 parts. Buying your drone, taking care of the legal side of the things, and flying it. Remember, however, that I am not a lawyer and none of the following constitutes legal advice. Now let's talk first about which brand of drone you should get. The biggest players in the consumer drone market are DJI, Parrot, Autel and Skydio, and of those, DJI are far and away the top dogs with a massive 76% market share. DJI drones are excellent, but these days the competition is excellent too, and the Autel Evo 2, Parrot Anafi and Skydio 2 are every bit as good as DJI's Mavic. So before you buy, carefully consider what you're going to use the drone for. If you plan on filming yourself on downhill runs on a mountain bike, then the Skydio 2 would be a much better choice than the Mavic Air, for instance. If you're a filmmaker, then the 8K video mode on the Autel Evo 2 would be a great choice. You'll probably end up with a DJI because it's the path of least resistance, but just be aware that there are other options. So what size drone should you get? Drones used to come in the same form factor, but these days you have way more options. And it's not just a simple case of choosing the size that appeals most to you, because they all have different uses. The DJI Phantom's form factor puts a lot of people off these days, but they are still popular drones due to their design. If you're hand catching a drone because you're on something that's moving, such as a boat, then you will find the Phantom's large looped legs to be infinitely preferable to the slim body of the Mavic. Meanwhile, the smaller foldable drones such as the Mavic Evo and Anafi are of course great if you need to walk anywhere with them in a backpack. However, the size of the drone you get also has a bearing on the red tape you'll face after you buy it. Governments around the world have adopted a sub 250 gram drone class, which removes a lot of restrictions and paperwork that larger drones suffer from. Drone manufacturers like DJI produce models like the Mavic Mini, which fall into this sub 250 gram weight class, and which here in Australia can be flown in more places more often and require much less paperwork. Then we come to the specific model you get, and this should be the principal factor that influences your eventual choice. Ask yourself honestly what you're going to do with the drone and how you're going to go about it. If you're a travel YouTuber, for instance, then the DJI Mavic range is an obvious choice due to its flexible feature set. However, if you're more of a filmmaker than an influencer, then the 8K sensors and first-rate image quality on the newer Autel drones will also be worth considering. If you're prepared to forego log video formats for the sake of world-class collision detection and advanced subject tracking, then the Skydio drones are your best bet. If you just want a drone for a bit of fun flying at the weekends, then you really don't need the 420 10-bit 4K footage on the Mavic Pro or the Air 2. And something like the Mavic Mini would be a much more sensible option. My point is that you should be realistic about what you're going to do with the drone. Now let's talk about accessories, and there are of course a huge number of aftermarket and manufacturer produced add-ons that you can get for your new drone, but very few of them are essential. Top of your list without a doubt should be a couple of spare batteries. Flight time on pretty much all modern drones is about 30 minutes, best case, and if you're out shooting video for the day, then you'll need to switch out those batteries regularly. If you are shooting video, then do invest in a set of ND filters to enable you to shoot at good apertures in bright sunlight. Sun visors for your drone controller screen, whether it's a mobile phone or a special screen, are a great idea and make flying in broad daylight much safer since you can actually see what's on the screen. Foldable landing pads are great and mean you don't have to stress about hand catching your drone. Buy a few V90 UHS-2 SD cards too. Kingston, Lexar and Sony are great. SanDisk, not so much. And while we're on the subject of aftermarket accessories, let's briefly mention DJI's Care Package. This is a $150 insurance policy for your DJI drone that covers you for accidental damage and offers a certain peace of mind that if you stuff it up badly and fly your new drone into a wall, you can get it replaced. If you only occasionally fly near or over water, then it's probably worth getting, particularly when you're new to flying drones. However, since you need to send the damaged drone back to DJI under the terms and conditions, it's not as useful as it might seem. If you lose your drone in a remote location or it gets stuck up a tree and you can't retrieve it, or you fly into the ocean, then you're fucked. It also doesn't cover flyaways on most of the range. When it comes to buying a drone, my advice is to buy new and shop around because deals are coming up all the time. If you're getting a DJI drone in particular, then there's no advantage in buying directly from them. But if you're buying from one of the other manufacturers, then buying direct is probably going to be your only option. There are some good specialist drone shops too, like Rise Above here in New South Wales, and these guys are well worth a look because you get excellent support and someone local to speak to if things go wrong. I would advise against getting a second-hand drone because it's easy to conceal crash damage and you really have no idea how many hours it's flown for. It is possible to check things like flight hours on motors, but I trust those figures about as much as I would the surprisingly low mileage on a car lot bargain owned by an old lady who just drove it to church on Sundays. If you buy new, you have a manufacturer's warranty and, in the case of DJI, the chance to buy the aforementioned Care Refresh package. Also be wary of second-hand batteries because certainly in the case of DJI and its Mavic range, they're notorious for getting bloated and failing sometimes when the drone's in use. I had a bloated Mavic battery pop its clips and nearly eject itself from my drone, so tread carefully. And when it comes to looking after your drone, always inspect it before you fly. Make sure the props are correctly secured and make sure the battery is properly seated. If you're not using your drone, do not keep the batteries permanently plugged into the charger as this will shorten their lifespan. Also remember to rotate your batteries so that you get even usage across them all, and at the first sign of battery damage or bloating, safely dispose of them and buy new because you do not want one failing in mid-air. When it comes to actually flying your new drone, remember to take baby steps. Fly in beginner's mode at first until you understand the controls. Learn to fly your drone by the sticks, looking at your drone and without relying on the live feed, and you will be able to fly it much more confidently. Remember that all drones have return to home functions these days, and these should be used if you are concerned about getting them back safely, but try not to rely too heavily on those automated modes. Alright, part 2, the paperwork. There are unfortunately some legal requirements around using a drone which make purchasing and owning one a much less carefree experience than it used to be. Like your car, you will have to remember to take care of some licensing paperwork once a year, and also like a car, you'll have to take care of a few forms and pay some money to the government when you buy it new. Will the feds come knocking on your door if you don't complete all this paperwork? Probably not. Does it attract large fines if you're caught not doing the paperwork? Yes. Ultimately, it's pretty similar to a car. You'll be okay until your luck runs out. If you plan on selling photos or videos produced on your drone, then you really have no option other than to fly legally, because whoever you sell your stuff to is probably going to ask. Control of the airspace over a country is typically administered by two organisations. The first is the military, and the second is a department of the government who look after all the non-military aircraft. Here in Australia, that organisation is the Civil Aviation Safety Authority, or CASA for short. These guys used to purely concern themselves with actual aircraft like passenger jets, light aircraft and helicopters, but now they're in charge of drones too, and I dare say they'd rather they weren't. Drones represent a unique problem for CASA because while all the other aircraft are flown by people who have a vested interest in doing things the right way, many drone users couldn't give a fuck about that and just want to have a bit of fun. So they've had to adapt to a changing world, and the process has not been an easy one. Thanks to lobbying by commercial drone groups and by other government agencies, and thanks in no small part to a ton of bad press, CASA were backed into a corner and had to introduce official processes around drones. As I mentioned earlier, the men in black are unlikely to knock on your door and ask why your drone isn't registered, but if the shit hits the fan, then you might regret not doing things the official way. And anyway, we live in Australia, don't we? We're used to having every single facet of our lives registered, levied, and with a tax of some kind, so it's just one more to add to a very long list. So the paperwork largely falls into two main sections: registering yourself and registering your drone. Alright, first item on our list is operator accreditation. You need your operator accreditation if you are flying any drone that weighs more than 250 grams, and for all drones if you are doing so for business purposes, whatever weight they are. What kind of business purposes? Well, CASA supply this list of examples. So if you're selling your photos or videos or using a drone for any proper kind of infrastructure purposes or for monitoring of any kind, then that's classed as business activities. Now at the moment this operator accreditation is free, but so was drone registration initially, and now you have to pay, so bear that in mind. Operator accreditation is open only to people aged 16 and over, and it is valid for 3 years. So just to be crystal clear on this, if you own a Mavic Mini, which falls into the sub 250 gram category, or any other drone that weighs less than 250 grams like a homemade FPV drone, and you do not fly for business purposes, then you do not currently need an operator accreditation certificate. And in order to get this accreditation, you need to jump through some hoops first. You need to create a My CASA account, and you need to apply for an aviation reference number, more commonly referred to as an ARN, and then you need to do a short online test. Still with me? Good. Okay, firstly, your My CASA account. This is not an accreditation, it's just a login so you can manage all the official paperwork. Think of it as MyGov for your drone and you won't be too wide of the mark. Anyway, create a login, confirm your email address and log in. You're done. If you do not have an ARN, then you will need to apply for one. Anyone that flies an aircraft, and yes, drones are officially classed as aircraft, needs an ARN. So if you ever plan on doing a pilot's license or whatever, then you can use your ARN for that too. When I applied for my ARN, it took about a week to come through, but they may have speeded up the process these days with all the irate drone users flagging their no doubt chronically understaffed and poorly designed systems. Once you have your ARN, you can log into My CASA and click on the RPA Operator Accreditation box. Now comes the good bit, the test. What's in the test? A bunch of extremely easy questions related to the standard operating conditions. The standard operating conditions are the rules that have been in place for many years now, such as going no higher than 120 metres and not flying your drone several kilometres over suburban housing estates to procure an undercooked beef sausage in a bit of white bread from a large DIY store. In any case, it's probably an idea to familiarise yourself with the rules before sitting the test. Most of it is basic common sense stuff and no trigonometry is involved. Right, my CASA account, tick, ARN, tick, online test, tick. Once you pass the test, you can download your bloody RPA operator accreditation certificate, and if you're flying a sub 250 gram drone for fun, then you're done. Yay! Right, so you've registered yourself and now you need to register your drone. If you own a Mavic Mini or any other drone that is under 250 grams and you're just flying for fun, then you do not currently have to register your drone. That will undoubtedly change in the future, but right now, sub 250 gram drones are not taxed if they are not used for business purposes. Got it? Cool. Okay, so as I record this in September 2021, if your drone weighs more than 250 grams and you are flying for fun, you do not currently have to register your drone. If your drone weighs more than 250 grams and you are flying for business purposes, then you need to register your drone. So that's the situation right now, and that information is valid right up until the 30th of May 2022. And you may be asking yourself, what happens on the 30th of May 2022? And I'm glad you asked that question, because on the 30th of May 2022, the rules are changing again. Hooray! From the 1st of June 2022 onwards, all drones heavier than 250 grams will need to be registered. That's right, no matter who owns them or whether they are being flown for fun or for business, all drones over that 250 gram weight bracket must be registered after the 30th of May 2022. And yes, that means paying a registration fee, which is currently $40 a year per drone. I predict that sales of Mavic Minis will skyrocket. To register your drone, you need to log into your My CASA account. Click on the link to register a drone and follow the prompts. If you sell your drone, you should remember to hop onto your My CASA account and deregister it, because if the person you sold it to flies it into Scott Morrison's face while he's eating a cheeseburger at Engadine Macca's, then the feds are going to come looking for you. Once a year, you will have to renew your registration and pay $40 for the honour. What will happen if you don't register your drone? Probably the same if you don't register your car. Nothing at all until the day the authorities ask to see your registration certificate, at which point you'll be in the shit. I know quite a few folks who have no intention of registering their drones, and the truth is, and I am not advocating for breaking the law incidentally, they'll probably be fine. We must all make our own decisions on this. I've registered myself and my drone because I fly commercially, but even if I didn't, I'd probably still register it because it beats constantly looking over my shoulder waiting for some asshole to grasp me up. Drones have a pretty crappy reputation at the moment, and if COVID has proved anything, it's that Aussies are more than happy to dob in anyone they perceive to be breaking the law. So if you encounter someone who takes a dislike to your drone and to you, and either calls the authorities or films you flying your drone and getting back in your car, as happened to me, then you might end up in the shit. So you've completed all the tedious bloody online forms, you've done the sodding test, and you've got all your paperwork in order. You can now chuff off and fly your drone wherever you goddamn please, right? Of course you can't. You are legally required to observe the standard operating conditions, of course. These have been in place for many years and have not changed substantially during that period. I'm not going to go over them all because I have done it in previous videos. I'd just like to point out 5 things you should be aware of if you want to fly fully legally. Number 1, you must fly your drone in visual line of sight. That means you're supposed to be able to see your drone with your own eyes at all times. So, if you send your drone up into the air, fix your eyes on that smartphone screen showing your live feed from your drone, and proceed to zoom a few kilometers away using only the screen to navigate, that's illegal. It also means you can't fly the drone behind some obstacles such as a building or in fog or smoke. How would they prove that you flew beyond visual line of sight unless they witness you doing it in person and without any metadata stored in the videos or photographs? That's an interesting question, isn't it? Number 2, you're supposed to fly during the day. That sounds pretty simple, right? But what is the official definition of day? Can you legally fly at sunrise and sunset? I am happy to answer that question for you. Here is the actual text from CASA's visual flight rule regulations. I'll put it on the screen. All of which means that you can legally put your drone in the air before sunrise and fly it after sunset. The actual timing will change over the course of the year, but if we take today by way of an example, morning civil twilight begins at 5:16 a.m. and sunrise is at 5:41. So I have nearly half an hour before sunrise when I can legally fly my drone. And if we look at this evening, then sunset's at 5:56, but civil twilight doesn't end until 6:22. So again, I can legally fly my drone for just shy of half an hour after sunset. If it's a cloudy day and there's no sunset colour, this means it's possible to shoot urban night scenes and be completely legal. I use the Lumi app on my iPhone to see the exact times of civil twilight, and the SunCalc Plus app on Android does the same thing. Alright, my third observation from the standing operating conditions is that you're required to fly no higher than 20 metres. We all know that. However, did you know it's above ground level, not sea level? So if you're up a 500 metre mountain, you can legally fly your drone 620 metres above sea level. This can be quite handy when you want to get a bit of extra height in your shot and there happens to be a nearby hill or mountain. Do bear in mind that as you move the drone over the slopes of the hill or mountain, the height above ground level might exceed 120 metres, so remember to descend or ascend as required. Also, buildings don't count, so you can't fly your drone over the Sydney Sky Tower. Number 4, you're not allowed to fly closer than 5.5 kilometres from a controlled airport. This is a fairly common sense rule as far as I'm concerned, because I don't want my drone endangering any aircraft with people in them. However, there are a couple of points to be made here. Firstly, the rule talks about controlled airports, which are usually ones with control towers. Little grass strip airfields are usually not controlled airports, and you are allowed to fly within that 5.5 kilometre radius if there are no aircraft in the area, and so long as you stay outside the official airfield boundaries. Secondly, sub 250 gram drones can fly within the 5.5k radius of a controlled airport, although obviously not within the airfield boundaries. You should of course apply some common sense and not go endangering the safety of any aircraft. Alright, number 5. While the laws do vary around Australia from state to state, you can photograph or film people in public, and you can photograph or film them on their own property with your drone. You should of course respect people's privacy and not go filming people sunbaking nude in their backyards, but if someone gets in your face and tells you it's illegal to photograph them, particularly when they're in public, then they are wrong. Even in WA, where the Surveillance Devices Act of 1998 prohibits the use of optical surveillance devices by a person to monitor or record someone engaged in a private activity, they still make an exception for accidental photography. It's not in the standard operating conditions, but I'd just like to point out that there are laws prohibiting the use of drones near marine mammals, and if you'd like to know more about this, check out my video on that subject, which I will link here. You're not supposed to get within 100 metres of a marine mammal such as a whale or a dolphin, but research has shown they are highly unlikely to be bothered by a drone, and so if one happens to surface near where you're filming, then be sure to video it as you move your drone away. As with everything else, simply try not to be a dick. For instance, if a bird takes exception to your drone, then let them have the airspace and go fly somewhere else. Alright, so let's talk about airspace, and the first thing we need to make crystal clear about this is that once a drone is in the air, even if it's 1 inch off the ground, it falls under the control of Air Services Australia, not whoever owns the land. So, whilst an organisation such as Parks Victoria might have a blanket ban on drones in all state parks, national parks and reserves across the entire state, as they do, that only prohibits you from taking off and landing on their land. Parks Victoria do not control the airspace above the park, and there is nothing stopping you from taking off on public land nearby and then flying over the park. This applies literally everywhere in Australia. Airspace is controlled by Air Services Australia, not the owner of the land, and all the no drone signs in the world won't change that. My usual guidance about not being a twat still applies, but know your rights. Drone use is also banned outright or subject to a timetable of closures in certain areas, and this is known as restricted airspace. An example of an area where recreational drone use is banned outright is most of Sydney Harbour. You can apply to fly there, and professional media organisations regularly do, but you're unlikely to get permission if you just want to film the Opera House via TikTok. Far and away the best way of seeing if a particular location is in this restricted airspace is to look at the ok2fly.com.au website. Not only does this show where the restricted airspace zones are, but it also shows you if they're active. As I mentioned, some airspace is permanently restricted, but some zones operate on a timetable. An example of this is where I live in South Coast, New South Wales. Here we have a large area of restricted airspace that covers most of the Shoalhaven LGA and is centred on the military airfield in Nowra. This cramps my style somewhat and means I can't fly my drone whenever I want. It's annoying as fuck, but fortunately the airspace is not active 24/7. Typically it's not active at weekends, and typically it doesn't become active before 10 AM in the morning. So I can legally fly early mornings and at weekends. Just check OK to Fly and you'll see instantly if you're good to go. Alright, let's talk about weather. And today's drones are extremely capable and can fly well in most conditions except for heavy rain. If you get caught out and it does start to rain, bring the drone back as soon as you can, as the motors don't do well with water. Let it dry up fully before flying it again, and remember to run the motors up and let them run for a few minutes before trusting your drone to the sky. And when it comes to things like wind, you'd be surprised just how much your drone can handle. Anything short of very strong to gale force winds are probably gonna be fine. But remember that the drone uses more battery power when fighting the wind, and if you have to bring it home in strong winds, you may struggle to make it back safely before the battery is fully depleted. I tend to keep my drone on the ground in anything over 30 km/h winds, which is well inside the recommended maximum for my drone of 40k, but I did get caught out one day and flew it in 50k winds, and it coped with it amazingly well. So have confidence in your drone, as it is a capable machine. Don't be afraid of slight breezes. Your drone may also suffer from heat, and this is worth bearing in mind if flying during the summer months here in Australia. An overheated drone is a dead drone, so be mindful of those temperatures and perhaps fly early or late in the day when the temperatures are lower. Check your drone manual for the maximum rated temperatures. On my Mavic 2 it's 40 degrees C. Do not try and recharge a hot battery because you can damage it that way. Let it cool down first. You'll also pick up a fair amount of bug jam during those summer months, so remember to give your drone a good clean when you get home. Well, that about wraps it up, guys. That's how to fly a drone here in Australia and do it legally and safely. I hope that you've enjoyed this video. If you have, you know the drill. Like, comment and subscribe. In particular, subscribe to see more great content from my little channel here. Thanks again, guys. Till the next time. See you later.